in the heart of an empire that once ruled the known world. The echoes of greatness still lingered in marble halls and broken columns. Rome, the eternal city, the mother of civilization, the symbol of power and order, stood at the center of history itself. For centuries, her legions marched across continents, her banners casting long shadows over kingdoms that trembled at her name. But all things that rise must one day fall, and the fall of Rome was not a single day, not a single war, but a slow and tragic unraveling of glory, a story written in the blood of emperors, soldiers, and citizens who watched their world crumble around them. It began, not with fire and sword, but with time itself. Empires, like men, grow old. What was once strong becomes weary. What was once united begins to fracture. The Roman Empire, stretching from the deserts of Africa to the cold forests of Britannia, had grown too vast to control. Its borders, once pushed forward by ambition, now became impossible to defend. The same roads that carried legions to victory now carried invaders to Rome's very gates. In the 2nd century, under the rule of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, Rome still shone with imperial pride. But even as he fought the endless wars along the Danube frontier, cracks had begun to appear. He was a philosopher king, wise and weary, who saw what others could not, that Rome's strength was fading, not from enemies outside, but from decay within. When he died in 180 AD, he left behind not a stable legacy, but a son, a Commodus, whose vanity and madness began to rot the empire from the throne itself. The age of the good emperors had ended, the age of chaos had begun. Commodus fancied himself a god, a gladiator, a man of destiny. But destiny has no mercy for fools. As he bathed in the luxury of palaces, corruption spread through the empire like poison in the veins of a dying beast. Senators conspired, generals betrayed, and the people lost faith. When Commodus was finally strangled in his bath, the Roman world exhaled in relief, but it was too late. The century that followed would be remembered as the crisis of the 3rd century, a time when Rome nearly destroyed itself. In those dark years, emperors rose and fell with the seasons. Civil wars tore the empire apart as dozens claimed the throne, each backed by armies hungry for power and gold. Borders collapsed, cities burned, and the plague devoured millions. The legions that once guarded Rome's glory now fought each other. The very soul of the empire was bleeding out. It seemed that the gods had abandoned Rome, but one man would hold the line. His name was Diocletian, a soldier who rose from nothing. He was ruthless, disciplined, and cold as iron. He understood that an empire too large must be divided to survive. And so he did what no one before him dared. He split Rome in two. The Western Roman Empire, ruled from Rome and later Milan, and the Eastern Roman Empire, ruled from the shining new city of Constantinople. It was a desperate attempt to save what could be saved. For a time, it worked. Order returned, the frontiers held, and Rome still breathed. But division, once begun, cannot be undone. As centuries turned, the two halves grew apart. The East grew rich and stable, drawing strength from trade and wealth. The West, however, struggled. Its lands were ravaged by endless wars, its coffers drained, its people burdened with taxes they could not pay. The old Roman virtues, discipline, duty, and unity, faded into memory. The heart of the empire was beating slower now, tired and heavy, waiting for the final blow. Then came the barbarians. To the north, in the dark forests of Germania, tribes long held back by Roman steel began to move. They came not only as warriors, but as entire nations, men, women, and children fleeing from something even more terrible, the Huns. A storm of horsemen from the east, fierce and unstoppable, drove the Germanic tribes westward, straight into the crumbling borders of Rome. The Visigoths, desperate and starving, begged for refuge within the empire. Rome, weakened but still proud, let them in, but treated them as slaves. Hunger turned to anger, and anger turned to war. In 378 AD, near the town of Adrianople, the Roman army met the Visigoths in battle. It was a slaughter. The legions, once invincible, were crushed. Emperor Valens himself was killed. his body never found. It was a sign from the gods Rome was no longer eternal. The barbarians had broken the myth of invincibility. From that moment, the empire was living on borrowed time. The Visigoths roamed through Roman lands unchecked. They did not seek conquest, they sought survival. But Rome's arrogance refused peace. And so, in the year 410, the unthinkable happened. The Visigoth king Alaric marched on Rome itself. For 3 days, the city that had ruled the world was plundered. The eternal city, that had not fallen in 800 years, lay at the mercy of outsiders. The sound of weeping filled its streets. The empire did not die that day, but its spirit did. Still, Rome endured, battered and ghostly. The emperors that followed were shadows of the greats that came before. Real power shifted to generals, warlords, and foreign mercenaries paid in gold that no longer existed. The Roman army, once the pride of civilization, was now filled with those who no longer believed in Rome, men who fought only for coin. Even within the palace walls, betrayal became the language of survival. Then came the Huns, led by Attila, the scourge of God. His armies burned across Europe like wildfire, and for a brief moment, all feared that Rome itself would be his next feast. But fate, strange and unpredictable, spared her once more. The Huns turned east, their empire vanishing as swiftly as it rose. Yet the damage was done. Rome, exhausted and hollow, could no longer stand. In the west, emperors were made and unmade by the sword. The Eastern Empire, now Byzantine, looked on with cautious distance, preserving itself while the West decayed. Italy was no longer Rome's center, it was her tomb. Barbarian generals became kings in all but name. One of them, Odoacer, would bring the final curtain. In the year 476, a boy sat upon the imperial throne, Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor of Rome. Barely a teenager, he ruled nothing. The legions no longer obeyed him, the treasury was empty, and the Senate was a ghost of its former self. When Odoacer marched into Italy, there was no army left to resist, no voice left to command. The Western Roman Empire ended not with thunder, but with silence. Odoacer spared the boy, sending him into quiet exile. The great empire that had ruled for 1,000 years was gone. Yet, even in its death, Rome never truly disappeared. Its laws, its architecture, its language, they lived on, woven into the fabric of every civilization that came after. The Church, once persecuted by emperors, now rose as the new guardian of Rome's soul. In the East, Constantinople carried the torch for another 1,000 years, calling itself Roman still. The empire had fallen, but the idea of Rome, the dream of order, of power, of civilization, would haunt humanity forever. The fall of Rome was not a tragedy of one generation, but of all that followed. It was the story of human ambition, how greatness breeds pride, and pride breeds ruin. It was the warning that no empire, no matter how mighty, is eternal. From the ashes of Rome rose new kingdoms, new faiths, and new wars, but the memory of the empire that once was lingered like a shadow over Europe. For centuries, kings and conquerors would dream of rebuilding it. Charlemagne, Napoleon, Mussolini all sought to wear the crown of Caesar, to reclaim the lost glory. But Rome was not just a city or an empire. It was an idea, and ideas cannot be conquered. In the ruins of the Colosseum, where once the crowd roared as gladiators fought for their lives, silence reigns. The stones still whisper of emperors and slaves, of triumphs and betrayals, of the moment when the world's greatest power forgot what made it strong. For Rome did not fall because of barbarians or battles. Rome fell because of Rome itself, because of greed, division, and the slow decay of values that once built an empire. Centuries have passed, yet the fall of Rome still speaks to us. It is the echo of our own future, a mirror held up to every great nation that rises and believes itself eternal. The monuments crumble, the armies fade, but the lesson remains, that power without unity, wealth without virtue, and pride without wisdom will always end the same way, in dust. As the sun sets over the broken arches of the Forum, one can almost hear the footsteps of ghosts, senators in togas, soldiers in armor, emperors in golden crowns walking through the twilight of their world. The empire that once called itself eternal had fallen, but in that fall, it gave birth to the modern world. The roads of Rome became the roads of Europe. Her laws became the laws of nations. Her dreams became our inheritance. And though her empire lies buried beneath centuries of ruin, her spirit endures in every city, in every nation that dares to build, to conquer, to rise. The fall of Rome was not the end. It was a transformation at the turning of an age. From empire to faith, from marble to dust, from the old world to the new. And perhaps that is Rome's greatest victory, that even in her death, she taught the world how to live, how to rebuild, and how to remember. For in every ruin, there is a memory. In every fall, a beginning. And in the story of Rome, the eternal empire, we find not just the history of a civilization but the reflection of ourselves.